People need to wake up. Americans need to put down the beer, get up off the couch, and pay attention to what's happening, because they could wake up to regional wars that combined begin to look awfully global.
I've been really worried about the sort of wag the dog, as we head into this election. And I know it almost sounds like a conspiracy theory at this point, but that we would try to rally the American people around a common enemy, whether it's through a false flag or some other strategy. This combination over the past 24 hours of this U.S. and U.K. propaganda telling us that Iran and Russia teaming up to bring us, to create a force of nuclear weapons. So I keep looking for these signs of the wag the dog moment, and every morning I'm sort of surprised by the new headlines, and I see today the UK and US warning about an alliance to build Iranian nuclear weapons and with Russia, and now we need to fear that. What's the truth here?
You say wag the dog, and I think it's interesting that if you listen to Zelensky and Netanyahu, they both have a similar objective. Both of them want desperately to drag the United States into war on their behalf. That's quite clear. So we're already the dog being wagged at this point. The question is, are we going to be wagged and dragged right over the finish line, which means open war with Russia, Iran, and potentially China, and who knows who else in the Middle East? I mean, the entire region is up in arms right now against Israel. That's another question. Now, to get back real quick to something else you mentioned, this missile the Houthis launched, remember it flew 1,300 miles in, we estimate, about 12 minutes.
A hypersonic, yes.
That sounds hypersonic to me. That may have flown at, say, 4,500 or 4,900 miles per hour. Anything over 4,500 miles per hour is hypersonic. And it can go all the way up to 7,600 miles per hour, which we don't see very often.
Here's a story from The World.
Syrians are starting to come to terms with the monumental shift taking place in their country. Many are euphoric after rebel groups led by an Islamist militia called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham brought down Syria's longtime dictator, Bashar al-Assad. HTS, as the group is known, is only beginning to establish its control. But Assad is gone. He's been given refuge in Russia. Along with his father Hafez before him, the Assad regime maintained a brutal authoritarian grip over Syria for more than 50 years. As the world's Shirin Jafari reports, Syrians are celebrating, but they're also nervous about what happens next.
A mother's ululation as she embraces her son for the first time in years. The sound she's making is a sign of celebration. My life, she tells him, as she showers him with kisses. All these years, may God bless you and keep you. The man is young, tall, with a beard. His mother is sitting cross-legged on the floor. A blanket covers her legs. It appears that the two haven't seen each other for years. In another video, three brothers hug and wail, then collapse onto the street. One of them traces his wrinkled hands on the face of another, as if to make sure he's really there in person. The caption reads, "They haven't seen each other for 7 years." Scenes similar to these are playing out in parts of Syria. The war separated and displaced millions of families. Some of what's emerging from there is harrowing. Witnesses have filmed prisoners being set free in several cities. They look pale, dazed, and emaciated. In this video posted online, one of them asks in bewilderment, "What's happening?" Someone tells him that the government has fallen. The man exclaims in joy, then continues his run with a huge smile on his face. Over the years, human rights groups documented mass hangings at the Sednaya prison near Damascus, giving it the nickname Human Slaughterhouse.
Hundreds of people coming, trying to reach the prison. They asking about their relatives.
Dr. Mahmoud Mustafa rushed to the prison as soon as the government fell. He shared some videos with me. He says families are gathering in search of their loved ones. Mustafa says the prisoners need medical care.
They will have many diseases related to this malnutrition, many skin diseases.
As an ophthalmologist, he says he's going to be advising the prisoners who've been in the darkness for a long time not to suddenly walk out into daylight. They can damage their eyes. He tells me that there are still many prisoners trapped in underground cells. The prison is like a labyrinth, he says, and the doors can't be opened. The guards have left. Further in the north of the country, I reached Abdul Kafi Alhamdo, an English teacher. We've been in touch since he had to flee his home in Aleppo 8 years ago.
I'm just thrilled with happiness I cannot express by words. What a day!
Alhamdo had to leave after Assad forces closed in on his city and the Russian airstrikes intensified. He tells me when the rebel forces retook Aleppo about a week ago, he dropped everything and drove there immediately.
I went there to visit my friends who died before I leave Aleppo. I went to their graves telling them, I told them that we're back, justice is achieved.
Justice achieved, he says. But the retaking of the cities by the rebels in Syria didn't happen without clashes. Over a scratchy phone line, Ayham al-Hussein, a 24-year-old dentistry student in the city of Hama, tells me he saw a lot of fighting. He says an airstrike hit the home of his girlfriend, killing her and her entire family, 10 people in total. Al-Hussein says he tried to take her to the hospital, but it was too late. She died in front of me, he says. It's hard to find a Syrian who hasn't been touched by the war. Half of the population was displaced. In 2014, the United Nations stopped counting the dead. So many were dying so fast, it was hard to keep up. Now, after enduring more than a decade of loss, displacement, and atrocities, Syrians are trying to make sense of what comes next.
I've been crying for about a week now.
Sarah Huneidi was forced to leave Syria for her activism when she was 17 years old.
I was a very passionate young feminist.
She says she used her real name to write posts on Facebook in support of the uprisings.
My friends were taken into custody and tortured, and my ex was tortured for a month.
Then she started to get threats, and she knew she had to leave. Huneidi moved to the US 6 years ago, and she's been working with the families of those who disappeared in Assad's prisons to document their cases. For a long time, she says, she felt that Assad was going to remain in power with impunity.
This is the reality. I've been telling myself that it's never going to happen.
Huneidi belongs to the Druze minority in Syria, and she says she's excited about this moment, but is watching the rise of the group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham with apprehension. She says she hopes the new Syria is a place for all Syrians. As for what she's going to do next,
I miss home so much. I haven't met my brother's kids. They only know me through a screen. I will go back immediately.
So many Syrians are planning to do the same. For The World, I'm Shirin Jafari.
From PRX.
Here's a story from The World.
For more than half a century, the Assad family ruled Syria with an iron fist. Hafez al-Assad was in power from the early 1970s until his death in 2000. His son Bashar then took over and managed to survive years of civil war in Syria. That war has killed hundreds of thousands of people and driven millions to flee abroad. But even for people who were not persecuted by the regime, life under Assad was hard. We reached historian Sami Moubed in Syria's capital, Damascus, to hear why Assad was so widely detested.
Damascus is very happy. Since it was the capital, Damascus suffered from the most harshest grip and the highest form of corruption during the Assad years. And because of that iron grip, Damascus was never vocally anti-regime because the regime was everywhere. And so this is the first time that Damascus actually speaks out in 40 years. This is the first time Damascenes are able to say, we've had enough and we welcome the change of regime.
How did you hear about it yourself and how did you react? I mean, were you in disbelief?
We were up all night and everyone I knew was up all night. We were following the news minute by minute. You know, Damascus fell before the rebel movement arrived. By the time Assad had left and the army had collapsed, the rebels were not there. So there was these couple of hours where there was some chaos in some streets, there was some looting, there was some theft. But the minute HTS, again, which is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, started entering the city, things started to return under control. By daybreak, people were still afraid, people were still home, nobody was going out. And today, life began returning to normal. 24 hours into the liberation, pharmacies have reopened, grocery stores, supermarkets. You can see streets filled with passerbys and cars. We're hearing that electricity is going to be restored fully within a month. Schools should be open within a week, and life goes back to normal.
We've seen a lot of videos of Syrians celebrating the end of the Assad regime. Why was this government so hated by people in Syria?
Corruption at every level, lack of freedoms to say anything or do anything, very high degree of nepotism, and failure. You had corruption with a collapsing state. Nothing was working properly. The police was corrupted, the judiciary was corrupted, the school system was corrupted. I think if we put all of that together, we can understand why the regime was so hated. Plus, what was really evident this time is that even Assad's own power base had abandoned him. This time, it was people who had fought for him first time. They had said, we're fed up with him. We don't want to fight anymore. Look at what they're saying now. And it's not just because of the change of leadership. There are many times when a government falls or a regime falls and people who supported the regime hold on to their policies. Now, even those who were very hardcore are saying that he abandoned us, he was a coward. And many are saying if he was going to step down that swiftly, why did he send all our young men into the battles and lead to the killing of so many Syrians?
You mentioned corruption and a failure to run the country, but you also said today Syrians can speak without fear for the first time. What did both Assads do that caused so much fear?
First of all, those who did speak their mind were hauled off and arrested, and many spent their long years in detention. And those who worked in public life, and this is very important, learned how to apply self-censorship because they saw what had happened to others, and they began fearing for their own lives or their children or their property, and they would just not want to go down that path anymore. Many people were saying, I don't want to go to jail, so if I want to live in this country, I need to keep my mouth shut. Otherwise, I'm going to suffer. And those who did not want to go down that line paid a very high price.
Sami, how have you managed? You live in Damascus. How have you managed under this regime?
I shut my mouth up. I'm a political scientist by training and by education, and I worked as a historian for the past 24 years. So that I would not venture into politics, so that I would not be under scrutiny.
Why did the Assad regime resort to things like barrel bombs, chemical weapons, imprisonment, and torture at the height of the uprising?
Barrel bombs cost nothing. They're much less expensive than heavy weapons. They went for the cheapest and most destructive of methods at minimal cost.
Sami, the rebels from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, they appear to be in control of the majority of the country now. What are you hoping for in the coming weeks? I mean, this is a huge kind of watershed moment, huge sense of relief by Syrians. But what are you going to be looking for?
For starters, I'm expecting better services: electricity, gas, fuel, the availability of products, and something that's very important here. Once HTS sets up a viable government that is free from corruption, we can send our kids back to school, we can return to a life with a lot of decency and normalcy. I'm expecting a much brighter future for Syria. You know, the Syrian Republic is young, and we tested with democracy for a few years until we were rocked by military coups starting 1949. And since then, this has just been one coup after another, 9 of which succeeded, 11 of which failed. So that didn't give a chance for Syrian democracy to flourish. And I think now is that golden opportunity. And I'm glad to be alive to see it. I would never have dreamt of watching the Ba'ath collapse and watching Assad, not even in my wildest dreams.
I know this is a real moment of euphoria, but I have to ask this. I mean, we have watched how other countries like Libya, Egypt, Iraq have had turmoil and violence after ousting a dictator. As an historian, what lessons could you apply to help Syria find a good path forward?
What Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is doing now and has been doing and will be doing, they have been confiscating arms. So pretty soon you're going to find no arms left in the country. if you're able to monopolize arms, and if no arms enter from abroad, and none are likely to, I think we're going to have a safe transition.
Sami Mubayad is a Syrian historian. He spoke to us from the capital, Damascus. We've mentioned that a coalition of rebel groups pushed Assad out of power, the most prominent among them, the group HTS and its leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. Learn more about the coalition and about al-Jolani specifically online at theworld.org. Our recent reporting has dug into his ideology and how the different rebel groups see the future of Syria. That's at theworld.org.
From